Good morning, people, here from the city house in Riga, Latvia. Yeah, and it's about time we had a look at the city. So compared to the Shire, we got a pretty janked out place, but the spot is pretty cool. These wooden houses here, surrounded by the big oak tree in between the big, tall, old brick buildings. Just look at these. Look at these facades. And the wooden window panes still. Yeah, it's interesting. So you still get to chill a little bit outside, and you almost forget that you're in the city if it wasn't for all the traffic and people shouting and whatnot. It's not the Shire anymore, huh? It's something else. But it has been cool to actually stay in one of the wooden houses that we've seen so many of on our way so far in the Baltics. Still here in the city, like this one here across the street. Yeah, so coming into the city on the motorcycle, I got a mixed vibe of the whole place. You see, you got looks like this all of a sudden. Look at angel faces on there, these rounded out facades with rough stone, and on the other side you have these smoother facades and they're Romanesque columns. But it's really a mix of influences out here. I can tell you things about Riga and Latvia, and you'll notice that it'll overlap with history that we've discussed before. You'll think, hey, I think I've heard that. I think you've mentioned that before. The history that I will tell about this place is again oddly similar to that of Lithuania, maybe even parts of Poland we've been to. Like I've said before, this here has been a very contested region over the many hundreds of years. You want to say hello to your little friend?
I did.
Okay, here, 1912, very Napoleonic era-esque. What does it say? Barclay de Toli. You have a go at it. You've done the alphabet and a billion words.
Well, I just looked at the let's check.
General Field Marshal Prime Michael Barclay de Tolly. The sculpture was made in honor of a previous war, the French invasion by Napoleon, to commemorate 100 years victory over the French forces, in part thanks to this man, a general in the Russian army. But as I was saying, over the centuries, the region and countries and cities in this region more than a few times changing hands between other powerful nations that resided in the region and others that came all the way up to this region and claim lands. A process that had started more or less with the missionaries that came to the region. Again, as I said before, it was inhabited by the pagans, those without faith, and so they came up here to try and convert them. Now they started coming here around the 11th, 12th century, and to start out with a familiar story, a familiar group, the Teutonic Knights. As I mentioned them before in another episode, they were originally mostly northern German crusaders that ended up crusading down in the Levant. And when that was over, the Teutonic Knights, they went back. They tried to stay in Romania, see if they could do anything there. They didn't want them there, so they ended up in the Lithuanian region. That's why we talked about them before. Now they had a branch, the Livonian Order, and their mission also had to do with converting, later became more conquering pagans, which, as you know by now, went a little, no, more than a little, heavy-handed in the region. I wasn't talking about that history. I almost passed obliviously by the Freedom Monument here, and we drove past it yesterday, and it was erected in honor of the liberation and the fallen during the independence struggle of Latvia in about 1918. But we'll get to the point later. It's tough in the Baltics, man. Not easy. So you had influences from the late Eastern Roman Empire coming up from the south, and influences from an emerging German people in the west. The already established Scandinavians up in the north, and on the east you had the emerging Rus. As you can already guess based on the previous stories that I've told, is that it's not going to be easy out here. And it really wasn't for the Livonians, later Latvians. And I want to introduce a new player into this region. Like I've already mentioned, the Nordics, and which major nation emerged from those peoples there up in the Scandinavian north? Well, it was Sweden. And you might think, ah, Sweden's so nice, you know, high up the happy index here in Europe, you know, good economy, solid, friendly people. But it wasn't always like that. Just ask the Danes and the Norse. Sweden used to be a big player for a while and had a big Scandinavian northeastern Europe empire. And so this city of Riga was part of the Swedish Empire for a while. As we walk back to the river, to the bridge over which we entered the city yesterday. Any trams? Nah. Look at the old tram. I love these, just like I love the old trams in Lisbon. Are you following me? Now this Swedish dominance in the regions didn't sit well with the Russians back then. They managed to conjure up a coalition. This was during a time before the Napoleonic Wars. A coalition in the region that would fight the Swedes, who of course had a bit of an extended empire by now, so it was harder to defend, and managed to defeat them. And then it was the Russians who became the dominant power in the region. During that great struggle between Russia and its coalition against the Swedish Empire, the Great Northern War, this city lost about half its population to famine and the plague. Historical classics. Usually war is only half the story. There's that railroad bridge we saw yesterday, the train crossing it as we came into the city. There's the tram, dope. So the Livonians were back to being part of the Polish, Lithuanian Commonwealth, and as I mentioned in a previous episode, remember the Polish partitions. 1, 2, 3, every time, chop, 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 a little bit of Poland. And unfortunately, Lithuania disappears until they both cease to exist. Well, the same ended up happening to the Livonian people. And so the Russians took the last final part, just like it happened in Lithuania, just like it happened in Poland. And as you've noticed by now, their shared histories, they go hand in hand. Moving on to the other side real fast here. The trams, no cars. Yes. We good. And we're on the other side. And so what was to be of the future Latvians? Well, for the time being, and I mean by that many years, it remained part of the Western Russian Empire, where a lot of architectural influences that you see in Riga, they were built during those years, and the city in a way flourished. It became the biggest port in Russia. And just to give an example of how big this city already was back then, before the Russians came, this was the biggest city in the Swedish Empire. So it goes to show. But over the years that followed, that emergence of nationalism that happened in the late 19th century and defined the earlier 20th century, just like in Lithuania, the spirit of liberation simmered, and its intensity only grew over time. And then came that period where finally they had the chance to liberate themselves, in the time when Latvia was born. Fast forward to 1918. World War II has just ended. They seized the opportunity and declared their nation independent. And for a brief moment, the Germans were out. But then there was, of course, another problem. The Bolshevists, an independence war emerged here, in which the Latvian people came out on top and then finally and firmly managed to establish that Latvian independent nation. But it was a struggle, and a monument of freedom was erected here in the city. We were there earlier in honor of that independence. But as is tradition in the Baltic region, that was not the end of it. And freedom it was for a while here in Latvia, at least a good solid 2 free decades, until, and this always happens, there always comes that time in history where it happens. World War II broke out, and after Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland, the Baltic states also got invaded, and thus Latvia, Estonia and parts of Finland became part of the Soviet Union. But as soon as the country changed hands, it would change again as Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, his invasion of the Soviet Union, and soon enough a battle for Riga took place, and the Germans conquered the city and took over Latvia. In the process, we rode past this here, St. Peter's Basilica, and I noticed the old stone, almost Romanesque lower architecture and the iron dome up on top. Turns out it used to be made out of wood. And during that battle for this city, during World War II, due to German bombing, the old tower burned down. And this is the new one that they built on top. And I think another building that was completely destroyed is the building of the Blackheads, which has also been reconstructed. Now this is definitely of an familiar influence. It reminds me of the architecture in Antwerp and Amsterdam. Clean drinking water. But as you know, a tale as old as recent time, the Germans lost World War II. And so what happened back then, once you get under Sovietico control, you got rubber stamp a socialist republic. And that's what Latvia became.
Are you hungry?
But before I continue on, there's still something that I gotta do, that I wanted to do in Lithuania. We forgot. And it was in Poland. I think it was Pedro who recommended traditional food, which was a cepelina. I thought it, you wrote it like Zeppelini, but it's with a C, Zeppelina. And maybe they have some here. It's like it. They have Zeppelina.
Yes, we have.
Is it traditional Latvian or only traditional Lithuanian?
It's Lithuanian.
We got a place outside, but you know those dark clouds that were gathering over the Riga River. The Dow. Yeah, now it's over. Bring the juice, or just leave it and get a refill. It got us. Dang it. And so Baltic life continues. This is more familiar. Here we get the Zeppelina. They are dumplings, right? Look like dumplings. Here. Sour cream. It's actually pretty damn good. Love that flavor.
It's got onions on
It's doughy potato on the outside, minced meat, pork, in this case I think on the inside. And once we're in Estonia, we have to retroactively try something from the Latvian cuisine. We're a bit late every time, you know? Don't copyright strike me, Susan. So we all know how the story ends of the Soviet Union, and its fall ushered in the true independence of Latvia in the early 1990s. Latvia by then had finally, and for now, the time being, permanently liberated itself from all the external menaces. And then later in the 2000s, they joined the European Union. And here we are today. And as the beautiful day comes to an end here in the capital of this relatively newly independent country, we learn that just like everywhere else in the world, Baltic history repeats itself. It's just that it does it more often than in other places in the world. Ciao.
Hey, baby.
Lido time.
Lido, baby.